Hello everybody and welcome to Flock Talk. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can teach your bird to be comfortable being restrained for veterinary exams. Being restrained is the single most important behavior your bird could ever learn going to the vet because they spend 90% of the vet being restrained and being examined. And if they aren't comfortable with that process, what can end up happening is your bird can end up getting quite ill because of the amount of stress that they end up experiencing when they instead spend the majority of the vet visit being panicked and scared and attempting to bite, and even putting the veterinary staff in danger because of how risky they can end up being with their biting. So this skill is definitely one I recommend teaching. If there's any cooperative care that you do decide to teach, this would be the one. It'll make vet visits for you and your birds so much easier, and your veterinary staff will thank you. The first thing I'm going to do is desensitize my bird to the action of my hand going over their back. This can be very intimidating for a lot of birds. They are prey animals, and an animal coming over top of them to grab them is very intimidating and scary. It looks like they're going to get eaten. So I am going to take some time here to hold my hand as far away as necessary to elicit nearly no fear responses from the bird that I'm working with. So in this instance, I'm actually able to be pretty close with Toto and start from there. But if your bird is really, really skittish, you might need to have your hand 3 feet higher than they are. And that's okay. You just find the starting point where you can have your hand relatively above your bird, or maybe even above them, but more so to the side, so you're not directly above them. You're just trying to find that sweet spot where you're getting them adjusted to the idea of your hand being over top of them or working its way over to being over top of them. So that way they can start to feel more comfortable with that and less threatened by it. So every time I put my hand over top of Toto, I'm going to quickly click and give him a treat for tolerating that experience. If Toto decides to walk away, or if he were to bite or lunge or hiss at me, those would all be very clear indicators that he is not comfortable with my hand being where it is, and I would simply take it away, give him a couple seconds to reset back onto my side of the perch, and then I will raise my hand a little bit higher next time until I find the spot that we are able to work with. So with each repetition here, I'm going to be moving my hand ever so slightly closer to his back, and I want to make sure that he is aware of where my hand is. I'm not going to distract him with a treat and make sure that he's really not looking so he has no idea where my hand is over top of him. I want to make sure that he is acknowledging where my hand is and even watching it come down towards him so he can truly feel comfortable. If I'm just distracting him and he's not paying attention and I'm moving that hand closer and closer to him, he's not really learning anything other than how to be distracted. And when he does notice that my hand is that close, that could cause me to get bit because he wasn't expecting it. So I do want to make sure that he is fully aware of what's going on, he is paying attention, and that he knows that he is being rewarded for my hand being in close proximity and him remaining relatively still. If you have a bird that does not stay still, a lot of birds will get really excited for training and kind of pace back and forth and wiggle a lot. That can make this very difficult. So what you can start with instead is rewarding stillness, where you can basically hold a treat kind of in front of them, nothing else involved, and just click and reward every time they stand still for a period of time and then gradually work up. That way you're not having a bird that is zigzagging and then you're trying to figure out how to grab them and read their body language with them pacing back and forth. So if your bird doesn't stand still and is just way too excited, I would make sure to focus on rewarding stillness prior to starting this step. So what I'm going to utilize here is a stop button. What a stop button is a way for Toto to exhibit a specific behavior that will tell me to stop what I am doing. So it's an easy way for him to opt out of the situation that doesn't involve biting me in any way. And what this is going to do is it's going to give him a lot more control over the situation when we're working with handling and restraint and things that really limit a bird's ability to communicate freely. We really want to make sure that we are giving them as many opportunities to communicate how they're feeling, so that way they don't get stuck and all of a sudden we're holding them and they've decided they're uncomfortable and they don't have a stop button. That's how we're going to end up getting bit, right? So what I've chosen to use as a stop button here is anytime Toto walks away. That's an easy way for him to tell me he doesn't like what's going on and he doesn't want to participate. It's a really easy cue for me to listen to. That's the behavior that I'm going to use as him to 100% guarantee that if he does this, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. On the flip side, his start button, so the behavior that he can do in order to tell me that he is ready to get going and participate in training, will just be shuffling towards the left-hand side of the perch to kickstart the process. This again gives him control over the situation, make sure that he's ready to go. If he was still on the right-hand side of the perch and I were to move my hand towards him, I'm invading his space when he's already told me he's uncomfortable. So by waiting for him to join me over on the left-hand side of the perch every time, he is actively choosing to hit start and get ready to go. So the bulk of this beginning part is just going to be me gradually lowering my hand closer and closer to Toto's back with each repetition, making sure to stop when he decides to walk away, and giving him all of the control that I can in the situation. We're not trying to force him into this, we're not trying to make him do it, we're trying to make sure that he is actively comfortable and wanting to participate. With enough practice, what you can start to have happen is your bird will start to shuffle towards the hand when it's lifted up, and that's usually a really good indicator that the bird is ready to rumble, but in some cases the bird will just pick up that you want them to stay still in order to be handled instead of shuffling towards the hand, so it'll look different for every bird. But the most obvious one is when you present your hand for the grab and they run right towards it, ready for what's going to happen. So once we're good and comfortable with that, we're getting really, really close to their back. What I'm going to start doing is lightly touching it. And there's a few key things here, because when you are working with handling a bird's back, it can be a hormonal stimulant and that can cause problems. The reason for this handling is for veterinary care. So it is one of those necessary evils. Ideally, no, we would never want to touch our bird's back. However, I would rather my bird be prepared for veterinary handling and restraint than be super stressed out in that moment. So that's why this is being trained, at least for me personally. So what I'm doing during this part, since this is a lot of repetitions of touching your bird's back, is I'm wanting to make sure that I'm keeping my touches closer towards the nape of the neck, in between the shoulder blades, and that I'm keeping my touches extremely light and I'm not stroking or adding too much pressure. If I were to stroke down his back, go lower down on his rump, or add a bit too much pressure, those would be more likely to trigger hormonal behaviors, so we want to avoid that. And as always, every bird is different, and the time of year that you are doing this training in will absolutely influence whether or not you end up running into troubles with that. Keep an eye on your bird. If you start seeing any hormonal behaviors, if you see them suddenly start panting or getting a little low on the perch, those can all be things that tell you that you need to slow down this training, maybe give it a break for a few days, or even be hands-off entirely until the season has passed. So do keep an eye out. You don't want to be causing any further problems in your bird when you're just trying to do some preventative training. So with each of these back touches, I'm going to be touching his back just a little bit longer each time, adding slightly more pressure each time, and doing all of that stuff to gradually get him comfortable with what it's going to feel like when he is being held in my hand. So what I'm wanting to make sure is that he's not only comfortable with my hand coming down towards him for the grab, but that he is comfortable being touched, and that he is comfortable with the pressure of my hand touching him and the heat of my hand coming off and touching him. All those little elements that come into play when he is actively being handled and could influence his comfort. Once the back is looking pretty good and I'm not getting any hesitancy, I'm going to go ahead and start adding a slight bit of pressure and cupping around the wings. This is more so how you're going to actually be restraining them. When you are restraining a bird, you do not grab them around the belly or torso, as they do not have a diaphragm, and if you restrict that area, the bird cannot breathe. So when you are holding a bird, the majority of the pressure you are placing is actually on their wings and their sides, just to hold them in place. So that's going to be the first hold that we desensitize him to. So he's comfortable with me touching his back. All I'm going to do is gently cut my fingers. I'm not even going to touch his wings yet. All I want to do is have him see my fingers in that location, acknowledge that they're there and that everything's okay. And then as the repetitions go on, I will lightly touch the wing. I'll add a little bit more pressure to the wing. I'll squeeze them a little bit so he can get desensitized to the way it feels to be grabbed and ever so slightly and gently squeezed when he's being held. Every single time that I touch him, every single time that I move my hand a little bit, he's going to get a treat for the repetition. The next stage is going to be a more proper restraint hold that happens when they are actively at the vet. And what this is, you can do it in two different ways. You can either do it with your finger and your thumb on either side of their head, or you can do it with your index and middle finger underneath their jaw. And that is designed to keep the bird from biting when they are doing medical restraints. So you basically are holding the bird by the neck, which sounds really terrible, but they have a solid trachea that can't really be squeezed like a human neck can. So you're not going to have to worry about suffocating them or anything like that. But you're aiming to put your fingers just underneath the jawline and almost extending the neck upwards, so that way the bird can't extend their neck, flip their chin down, and bite the finger that's right there. This is the hold that you really want to make sure you nail down, because the vet, or you if you are assisting the vet, will be holding them that way in order to keep the vet safe and make sure that their fingers aren't getting nipped. So I will be repeating the exact same process for this as I was for the wing grab, where I'm just going to have him see my fingers be on either side of his head. You could even do one finger at a time if you find your bird's being a little bit more sensitive. And then I'm going to lightly touch his cheeks. I'm going to maybe ruffle his feathers like scritches and go down towards his neck a little bit. And I'm just slowly going to get him comfortable with my fingers being in that spot before adding a little bit of pressure each time. So now he's going to feel a little bit restrained. Now he's going to feel me holding his head in place just a little bit. And I'm going to do this just for like a nanosecond, then I'm going to work up for slightly longer durations and make sure that he's comfortable with the act of me holding him and applying that little bit of pressure that's going to be required for proper restraint. And it's really important to make sure that they are comfortable with each individual step of the restraint prior to actually restraining the bird. And the reason for this is that this is a lot of different elements. This is a lot of touching. This is a lot of stimulus happening in a lot of areas of their body. And this is a situation where the bird now has no control over what happens to them. They can't move. So if you restrain them and you don't have them properly desensitized to all the individual elements and you just go ahead and do it all at once, that's going to be super overwhelming. That's going to throw them off. That could really scare them. So you want to make sure that each individual aspect is something that they are comfortable with. So when it comes to being fully restrained, they understand all the individual elements of it and are comfortable with the entire process. So this last part is arguably the hardest for most birds, and this is going to be actually getting them up into your hand. So you can fully restrain them on the perch virtually, but both of their feet are still gripping quite tightly. And if you were to just try and lift your bird up, for most cases anyways, your bird's probably just going to clench on. And that's because it's safe. The perch is somewhere that they are sturdy, that they are stable. So most birds are unlikely to just release the perch. So if your bird clenches on, do not worry. That's actually a good thing. It does mean that they're actively conscious in this situation and that they are aware of their surroundings even though they're being grabbed. And it just means that they are comfortable with you being grabbed, but they aren't comfortable leaving the perch yet. And that's okay. The perch is what's keeping them safe and stable. They don't know that you holding them isn't going to suddenly cause them to fall to the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust Toto to the idea of being entirely in my hand, but also having my hand cupped around his back and being touched. So instead of grabbing him first and like prying his feet off the perch, what I'm going to do is I'm basically just going to ask him to step up onto my thumb. And this is something I had to train separately because Toto does not know how to step up onto my thumb. So I did have to break this down into really small steps for him. So I held my hand in a fist and just gave him my thumb to step onto, rewarded for one foot, then for both feet. And then what I did is I gradually opened my fist up so it would create that cup shape that's going to cup over his back and eventually be touching him. And we're just going to keep working on getting him to step up so he's comfortable being off of that perch and in my hand with my hand cupped over him. And once he's looking pretty good with that, I'm going to add the touching in. And this is an area where Toto struggled, and most birds will. It's very discomforting to be getting touched from the back while trying to step forwards. You know, you could get pushed down, you're quite vulnerable. So it took a little bit of time. So what I did was a variety of different touches where I would maybe touch his back and then lift my hand up a bit so there was no more pressure on him when he was actually stepping onto my thumb, and then gradually working up to me being able to have that pressure on his back just a little bit and him still know that it's safe to step off of that perch and onto my thumb. And then I will add in having him being touched by my hand, maintaining that pressure while stepping onto my thumb, and then maintaining that pressure while he is still actively on my thumb, which would be the same as what's going to happen when he's being restrained, because he's actually going to have both his feet, hopefully, adhered to my pinky and my thumb while I'm holding him for security. So he's going to be adjusted to the idea of standing on my finger with his feet and also having pressure applied to his back. So once we're looking really good on that realm, we can work on the actual lifts. And what I did for this, to make it a little bit easier for Toto, was I used a slightly wider perch. I used the back of a chair. You could also use a flat table. And this is just going to make it a little bit easier for him to release the perch. If you're working on a really narrow, skinny perch, they're not going to be very inclined to let it go. And that's going to make life very difficult for you, and it's going to take a very long time. Whereas if you work on a flat surface like this, it's a lot easier for the bird to release their foot. Now what I'm going to do for this stage, since Toto has decided that every single time I present my hand he should wave with his foot, I'm going to use that to my advantage here. And I'm going to use that little foot in the air as my cue to progress. So I'm going to present my hand, I'm going to touch his back, and if he lifts that foot to wave, or you could even ask the bird to wave to lift that foot, I'm going to give him my thumb to hold on to and very gently lift. And the first time I'm not even going to lift him off the ground. It's just going to be the pressure or the sensation of being lifted. And then I will gradually lift him a little bit more each time, assuming that he is comfortable with it. You will notice that when I'm doing this, I'm not properly restraining him, and that is on purpose because I do not want to add too many things at once. We are just introducing the idea that you lifting that foot and stepping onto my thumb is the cue for me to lift you upwards, and the rest of my hand is there to catch you and keep you stable. That's all this is introducing. I don't want to be fully restraining him and doing this at the same time because that could be very overwhelming. In this situation, Toto has a bit more freedom of movement and can easily decide to nip me or walk away if he needs to. I do not have a problem if he suddenly decides to do that. However, I did a really good job at moving at his pace with this one, so I didn't get bit throughout this whole process, which is the way it should be, because he shouldn't have to bite in order to tell me when to stop. Once we are getting that concept pretty consistently down, where he gives me his foot, I lift him up, and he's eagerly returning for the next repetition, I will begin to add in the rest of the restraint that we were practicing, either with the finger and thumb on the side of his head or the index and middle finger on either side of his head to restrain him. And I'm going to do the same process. You lift your foot up, I will gently lift you, and we will move on from there. My ideal way for restraining small birds is to use my thumb and my pinky as a perch. If their feet are just free-flowing, a lot of birds will feel extremely uncomfortable, and that can make this very difficult for them, whereas if you give them that little perch to hold on to, they can feel more stable and secure. So I do like to offer that to them. It just makes it a little bit easier in the adjustment. And then same as with everything else, you're going to do things a little bit at a time. So I'm going to hold him like that just for half a second, then a little bit longer next time, and a little bit longer, over and over and over, lift him a little bit higher. Gradually introduce all of those elements little bits at a time, so that way he can slowly build comfort with being restrained, knowing that he will be let go very quickly, that it's not overwhelming and scary, that I'm not going to randomly rush him away and do invasive things. I'm just going to be picking him up and putting him down, easy peasy. And then that's pretty much it. From here you can begin to introduce more complex things like handling the feet, looking at the beak and wings. You could even palpate the chest. You can begin to desensitize them to all of those little things. You can begin to gradually work on rotating them so they can be laid on their back. Just be sure that with each of those you are moving very, very slowly, that you're doing very short touches at first, maybe even practicing them without the restraint first, so that way the bird is fully capable of leaving the situation if they want to. And that way they are able to be restrained at the vet without fear or force, and fully understanding what's going to happen to them and be comfortable with the process, which will help reduce all of that stress at the vet, which can be oh so dangerous for our little baby birds. So that about does it for this one. For some more touch-shy birds, it can be a very difficult process and take quite a bit of time. Being upside down can be a lot more intimidating depending on the type of bird that you're working with and just their individual personality. That can make this process take a lot more time. For Toto, it was a week of sessions that added up to being an hour and a half in total. But for some more shy, hand-shy birds, it can take a lot more time, and that's okay. It's not a race, it's just trying to get them comfortable with the process to make stress a little less on them when they're at the vet. But that will do it for today. I hope you guys found this video helpful and it'll help make the vet visits less stressful for you guys in the future. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye! Okay, can you stop wanting to be upside down for 2 seconds?